Clarence Thomas, Supreme Court Justice. Hi class, my name is Curtis Walker, and the subject of my mini lesson will be Supreme Court Justice Clarence Thomas. And I will start off with just a little bit of a short summary, and then we'll get into a little bit more depth. So Clarence Thomas is the Supreme Court Justice of the United States Supreme Court of America, and I will start with one of his quotes, which is a very simple one, something that I think many people can relate to. And it says, "And I don't think that government has a role in telling people how to live their lives. Maybe a minister does, maybe your belief in God does, maybe there's another set of morals, but I don't think government has a role." So Clarence Thomas was born on June 23rd, 1948, and he grew up in a small African community in Penn Point, Georgia, with his older sister, Emma May, and younger brother, Meyer Lee. His father disappeared early on in his life, and the family divided even further. When he was 9 years old, he grew up speaking Gula, which is a Creole dialect. So he had to develop the habit of silent listening when he was young because he struggled to speak standard English. He went to an all-white Catholic boarding school, similar to me. I went to an all-white school when I was young, where he made good grades, played on the football team, similar to me as well. He did encounter some racism, and next he went to Immaculate Conception Seminary in Missouri after high school. There he overheard a racist remark about the assassination of MLK, which caused him to decide that he would not become a priest. His work, and we'll cover it a little bit more in depth, but you see the 3 points there. He earned his law degree from Yale University in 1974. He attained employment as a lawyer at Monsanto Company in 1977, and he was nominated and confirmed to the United States Court of Appeals 1990-91, and we'll get a little bit more into his work, but as you can see there on the left side of the screen. And I did not include dates here because I will actually get into the dates a little earlier, but he's also described as an originalist and a textualist, and he's described as one of the court's most conservative members. And this covers a little bit of his legacy. So he's an originalist as far as the Constitution. He believes in the separation of powers and more like a federalist. He was known to be silent on the bench for 10 years. He did not actually ask a question until after his best friend passed away, Justice Scalia. He is the second African American nominee after Thurgood Marshall, who was the first. He opposes race-based affirmative action in universities, which we'll get into, and he believes in a colorblind constitution. All right, so we covered a little bit about it. I guess I should tell you why that I chose Clarence Thomas as a Supreme Court Justice. One, he seems to be a very interesting person to me. Obviously, we have some similar views. If you're one of those that actually responds to some of the writings that I have in the class, you will see that I am kind of an originalist. I definitely believe that we should take into consideration the intent of the framers when we are reading the Constitution, as well as applying law. I believe in precedent, but I also believe that sometimes precedent is not good, as we saw in the cases of Plessy versus Ferguson. And so anyway, so in his childhood, like I briefly touched on, that he grew up in a town called Penn Point, Georgia, 1948, where he was born. His father walked out of the family. As a result, he found himself and his younger brother. They were sent to live with his grandfather, Myers Anderson, and their grandmother in Savannah, Georgia. They were devout Catholics, and he became a member of the National Association of the Advancement of Colored People, otherwise known as the NAACP, and they sent Thomas to Catholic school, which was staffed by nuns. So he grew up, obviously, speaking Gula, and unlike other Supreme Court justices, he rarely ever spoke during the court proceedings, or what we call oral arguments. In 1964, his grandfather withdrew him from this all-religious school, and he went to an all-Catholic boarding school in Savannah. There he encountered some racism because of dislike of the person or so forth. He made excellent grades, and then he went to the Immaculate Conception Seminary, which is a place for religious education, in Missouri, 1967. There he graduated. He was not the only African American student there, but he still had some poor race relations. He That's where he heard the remark about the assassination of Martin Luther Jr. King, which caused him to say, you know what, I don't think this is for me. I don't want to become a priest. So he left seminary. He enrolled at Holy Cross, which is a school in Worcester, Massachusetts. He was a devout student there, ran on the track team, did some volunteer work in the community, helped found the Black Student Union at Holy Cross, and there he met his first wife, Kathy Ambush, whom he married after graduating in 1971. The couple had one son, but they divorced in 1984, and then he married his second wife, Virginia Lamp, otherwise known as Jenny Thomas. He had a really, really great academic record, and he was admitted to the law school of Yale, Harvard, as well as the University of Pennsylvania. He chose Yale, excuse me, because of the financial support that was given to him as a part of affirmative action for students that make up the racial and ethnic minorities. He continued to do well at Yale, and he appeared to fit in socially pretty well. In those years, he kind of describes his rage and his loneliness, feeling snubbed by quote-unquote white people that viewed him as someone that only could get into Yale because it was an affirmative action policy. Graduating Yale Law School in 1974, he got his first position as the staff of the Missouri Republican Attorney General, whose name was John Danforth. That was in 1979. He moved to Washington, D.C., became the legislative assistant to Danforth, and he only took the position on the condition that he would not be assigned to civil rights issues, which was interesting. So he had some resentment, obviously, to affirmative action because of his life experiences, dealing with racism and the feeling of not being good enough because of the treatment that he received at the hands of people of other ethnic and color groups. So he became very independent, and then which is something that he learned through his grandfather, and he started circling in the conservative African American groups. There, his ideas soon brought him to the attention of President Ronald Reagan. In 1981, he was appointed Assistant Secretary of the Civil Rights of the United States Department of Education. And he openly stated there that minority groups must succeed on their own merit. Again, looking back to affirmative action and how he was treated, where he thought that the only reason that he was being treated because they didn't feel that he was good enough. So obviously this became part of his own personal, I would not say personal bias, but his own personal experience, where he definitely thought that we could achieve on our own merits and not on the basis of color or on the basis of somebody else's favor. So he asserted those affirmative action programs and civil rights legislation did not improve living standards. There's definitely some sentiment considering the plight of blacks in America and the feelings of many great leaders from Marcus Garvey to W.E. Du Bois to Reverend Martin Luther Jr. King to Malcolm X, Jesse Jackson, and so forth on down to our current situation. In 1982, he became the chairman of the United States Equal Employment Opportunity Commission, which is interesting, right? Which is designed to enforce laws against discrimination and unequal treatment based on age, disability, nationality, race, religion. In the workplace, he served 2 consecutive terms as the chairman, despite having been previously sworn that he would never work with the EEOC. So it's funny how life goes. All right, so getting to the major parts of his life that most people know him for, he was nominated to the Supreme Court, obviously being the second African American after Thurgood Marshall on July 1st, 1991. Then he attended Senate hearings. Our current president, Joe Biden, is known, one of the things that is known about him is that the contentious hearings that he led against Justice Clarence Thomas, this is well known. You can Google and understand exactly the depth of the contention that was there at that time. And things were going smoothly until Anita Hill, another lawyer, provided some allegations against Thurman Thomas. She had testified to the FBI and some women groups, and they led Senate confirmation to review the charges that Hill were alleging against at that time, nominee or candidate Thomas. So Hill's charges basically state that in the workplace that she felt uncomfortable and that there were some unwanted advances by Clarence Thomas, and that was the nexus of that. Thomas denied any wrongdoing during that process, but it was very contentious, very heated. There was some language that would be considered over on the tone of racist language by the then, who is now president, by then Senator Biden, as well as others and on the committee. They definitely were, in my opinion, they were going for blood, political blood, and so he referred to those acts similar to the terrorizing of blacks in the form of lynching during the Jim Crow era. Uh, Eventually, Thomas was confirmed 52-48, which is the lowest confirmation of any Supreme Court justice in the past century, due to the allegations of sexual harassment, which became a major political issue. Um, because of that hearing and the impact of that hearing, the resulting, um, how could I say, uh, the resulting organizations or the resulting movements that came out of the hearing probably could still connect to the Me Too movement in a sort of way. But either way, national, state, and federal laws were created to deter workplace practices that could make other employees uncomfortable. And at the same time, there were many articles and books that were written about this particular confirmation hearing specific to the charges that Hill alleged against Thomas, stating that they were valid, even though Thomas was confirmed and those charges were never proven. So, moving on to his career in the United States Supreme Court, Justice Thomas was often paired frequently with Justice Antonin Scalia, many consider him to be his best friend, and Chief Justice William Rehnquist. Thereby, that was the conservative bloc on the Supreme Court. And basically, this conservative bloc were people who resist change and prefer to keep the traditions. Again, dealing with the term originalist, and I just want to give you that in this term here because it comes off a little bit better. So an originalist basically means that those who consider the Constitution, one, correct, and in lieu of the Constitution, at arriving at decisions, they always intend to look back at the intent and the meaning of the Constitution through the lenses of those who created it. They apply those principles to their course writings and the jurisprudence that they practice. And that is it in a nutshell. Okay, so he, as well as Justice Rehnquist and Justice Scalia, became the conservative core, and generally, Justice Thomas was often silent during oral arguments or proceedings at the Supreme Court until Justice Scalia, many people say his best friend, passed away, and then Justice Thomas, according to Justice Ginsburg, started asking questions, and many people were surprised because he had never spoken. Obviously, some of his views are clearly articulated in his writing and his opinions. His essays are generally, and his opinions are generally considered very, very clear, even in their disagreements or dissents, and very consistent. And obviously, because of his views and his life experience dealing with equal opportunity or affirmative action, many African American political groups criticized him because of his conservative values because they thought he should be more moderate or radical to some degree. So after the first few years of his appointment, Thomas kept a low profile, and he began to make occasional appearances with conservative political groups, and he was increasingly hailed as a judicial hero by American conservatives. And even to this day, in some of the rulings, obviously there's the ruling of Roe v. Wade that just came out, and there are some rulings dealing with election laws that came out, and you can see that his originalism shines forth. All right, so that pretty much is Justice Clarence. I don't want to belabor, I'm really getting long here, in a nutshell, but I will read a couple of his quotes because most people remember him for the the Anita Hill hearing, but very few people take the time to actually see how this brilliant mind thinks on the court. So I think that one of his quotes that I find interesting is it says, "In our culture, cross-burning has almost invariably meant lawlessness and understandably instills in its victims well-grounded fear of physical violence. And you can remember that you heard a little bit of that during the Anita Hill episode during his confirmation, as well as the younger portions of his life when he experienced racism. After 25 years on the court, he has established a record on race issues, and no one is surprised by his racial conservative opinions. And there is no expectation, that he will decide cases differently. So, in a nutshell, I believe that Justice Clarence Thomas is one of the best Supreme Court justices that we've ever had. I believe that his views are very valid for today society. I think the strength of his convictions has carried him through as a Supreme Court justice through his tenure, and it is my hope that he continues on the Supreme Court for many, many years to come, and that, of course, my own political bias would probably show through, but that there will be more justices that will consider the original intent of our Constitution and apply that to society as a whole. I think there's some good in that. That is my thing, my little mini lesson on Justice Clarence Thomas. I hope that you enjoyed it. Bye.